The ballroom laughed, and the boy did not know why. He was 19, deaf since the fever of his 6th year, and dressed in a coat his brother had ordered from London, with the particular care of a man who understood that strangers judged first by the cut of a lapel, and only sometimes, rarely, by anything else. 3 young women stood in a half-circle around him. The one in pale yellow asked him a question he could not hear, and Henry produced the small, uncertain smile he had been taught to produce when his eyes could not find the shape of the words on a stranger's mouth. The girl laughed, her companions laughed with her, and Adrian Carlisle, 6th Duke of Wycliffe, standing on the far side of the room with a glass of claret he had not touched, watched his brother be mistaken, again for stupid. He could not cross the ballroom. He had learned in 5 years of trying that the moment a duke arrived at his brother's elbow, every fan in the room snapped open, and every whisper began calibrating Henry's affliction against the size of the Wycliffe fortune. And Henry, who could not hear the whispers, could read the faces of the whisperers, and would not eat for 2 days afterward. So Adrian stood, and watched, and held a glass of wine he could not drink. It was then that he noticed her. She stood beside a pillar, half in shadow, in a dove-grey gown of unfashionable simplicity, and she was not laughing. She was watching Henry the way Adrian himself was watching him, with the particular stillness of a person who has seen this before and knows precisely what it costs. He could not see her face. He saw her hands, gloved, folded against her waist, moving against each other in a small, involuntary gesture that he did not, in that moment, recognize. By the time he looked again, she was gone. He asked the Baron for her name. The Baron, distracted by a wine merchant, said only, "Lady something, Northumberland family, came down with the Pembertons, quiet creature," and turned away. The next morning, in the carriage home, Adrian Carlisle took the signet ring from his finger, slid it into his coat pocket, and did not put it back on. The signet ring stayed in his coat pocket for 11 days. In that time he wrote 3 letters, one to his aunt, declining her further introductions for the season, one to his steward, instructing that the carriage which would carry him and Henry to Kent be unbranded, and the coachman drilled to call him only Mr. Carlisle, and one to Lord Aldridge, his late father's oldest friend, who replied by return of post with the brevity of an old man who had stopped wondering why anyone did anything. "Come, bring the boy. I have ducks. I have a stretch of river. I have no daughters to push at you. The claret is mine, and it is poisonous. Stay a month." He told Henry by note, in the careful, sloping hand they had used for one another since Henry was 7, and Adrian had become, suddenly and terrifyingly, the head of a household with a deaf brother and no instructions. "We are going to the country. No one will know me there. No one will know us. Trust me." Henry read it twice and looked up with the steady, evaluating gaze that had been the only weapon left to him after the fever. Adrian placed his hand on his brother's shoulder briefly, the way he had done since Henry was a boy, and the only comfort he permitted was the weight of a hand that did not require him to speak. After a moment, Henry nodded. Aldridge House was a low stone manor set against a hill in Kent, with orchards allowed to grow somewhat wild and a long lawn sloping down to a river the colour of weak tea. Lord Aldridge met them in the drive in a coat too large for him. He shook Adrian's hand. Then he looked at Henry, and he did not crouch, and he did not raise his voice. He held out his hand and said, slowly enough that Henry could read his lips, "I am Aldridge. I knew your father. I'm sorry I did not know you sooner." Henry took the hand. Adrian watched the brief surprise softening in his brother's face, and felt, not for the first time in those 11 days, the particular shame of a man who had spent 5 years protecting his brother from the world by keeping him out of it. There were 6 other guests. The Carmichaels, old and deaf themselves in a more ordinary way, and therefore unable to comment on anything they did not see. A young couple from Sussex who noticed nothing outside one another. A widower named Halliday who collected birds. And, Aldridge said in the library that first evening, while pouring claret, the Pembertons sent down a young lady, Eleanor, quiet creature, some cousin or other. They did not want her in London. I gave the girl a room because I owed her father a favour from 1789 that has waited too long to be repaid. Adrian set down his glass. Eleanor, he said. Of which family? Beaumont, Northumberland Beaumonts. Father died, mother died, the brother died too. She lives with the Pembertons on sufferance. Why, have you met her? Once, Adrian said. I think. I'm not sure. He was sure. She came down to breakfast the following morning. The east light came through the windows in clean, unbroken bars, and Lady Eleanor Beaumont walked into it in the same dove-grey gown he had seen at the Pembertons' ball, turned at the cuffs, in the practical way of a woman who had one good gown and had decided to wear it until it gave out. She greeted Aldridge. She greeted the Carmichaels. She greeted Adrian with a small, formal incline of the head one offered to a stranger, and her eyes, when they met his, did not flicker. There was no recognition. There was only the careful expressionlessness of a woman who had learned to enter rooms without being seen. She sat across from him. She poured her own tea. She made polite, brief conversation with Mrs. Carmichael about the weather, repeating herself twice because Mrs. Carmichael could not hear her and would not admit it. By the time Adrian rose, she had asked him precisely 2 questions, whether he had travelled far and whether he took sugar, and received his answers with the absent politeness of a woman who had no particular interest in the man across from her. He watched her leave the room afterwards. She walked the way she had stood beside the pillar at the Pembertons, contained, soundless, occupying as little space as she was permitted. She does not know me, he thought, and then, less certain, or she has decided not to. That afternoon, Henry went out to the rose garden with his sketchbook. The roses at Aldridge were nearly past, but 2 or 3 late varieties still held their colour, and Henry had been drawing flowers since he was 12, when a tutor in Vienna had given him a pencil and discovered within a week that the boy who could not be taught Latin could be taught everything else. Adrian, who had no skill at idleness, watched from the morning-room window as his brother settled on the stone bench, opened his book, and began to draw a Bourbon rose with the absolute concentration that was Henry's particular grace. Eleanor came around the corner of the hedge perhaps 10 minutes later. She had not known Henry was there. He could see it in the way she stopped, the half-step backwards, the brief tightening of the shoulders. She had come into the garden for solitude, and she had found a stranger in it. She turned to leave, and then she did not. She turned back. She looked at Henry, bent over his sketchbook unaware, for a long moment, with an expression Adrian could not read from the window. And then she crossed the lawn. She did not approach him from behind. She walked deliberately around to a point in his field of vision, and stopped at a respectful distance, and waited until Henry, sensing the change in the light, looked up. His face went still. The stillness Adrian knew, the stillness that meant a stranger had arrived and Henry was preparing, again, to smile and nod and pretend. Eleanor did not speak. She raised her hands. From the morning-room window, Adrian could not see clearly what she signed. He saw only the shape of her fingers moving in the air between them, precise, unhurried, the gesture of a woman who had not used her hands this way in a long time, but had not forgotten how. He saw Henry's face change. He saw his brother sit up slowly, as though afraid that any sudden movement would scatter what was happening. He saw Henry raise his own hands and sign back. Adrian sat down on the window seat without meaning to. He had not seen Henry sign in public for 5 years. He had taught the boy, at 14, that signs were for the house and the schoolroom and the privacy of family, that the world preferred a deaf boy who could read lips and pass, more or less for an ordinary boy with a quiet manner, that Henry's chances in life were better if he kept his hands still. He had told himself this was kindness. He had told himself this was protection. He had watched for 5 years his brother sit on his hands at dinner parties, and in a rose garden in Kent, on a Wednesday afternoon in September, a stranger in a turned-cuff gown had crossed a lawn and given Henry back his hands. He saw Eleanor laugh once, silently, with her shoulders, the way people laugh in libraries, and Henry laugh after her more loudly, in the sudden, uncareful way of a boy who had forgotten he was being observed. He saw Eleanor sit down on the grass beside the bench, not on it, and Henry turn his sketchbook around to show her the rose. He saw her point to something, and Henry shake his head, and her sign something else. He saw Henry put his hand to his mouth, and he understood, even from the window, that his brother was weeping. He almost went down. He did not. He understood, with a clarity that arrived sharply and would not leave him for many days afterwards, that his presence would change what was happening, and that what was happening was not for him. He sat back down. He watched them for an hour. When Henry came in for tea, he came in still holding the sketchbook, and his eyes were red, and he sat down beside Adrian on the sofa in the library, and pressed his shoulder against his brother's the way he had done at 6, before the fever, and he signed, there, in the open library, without checking first whether anyone could see. She knows. She knows it. Adrian put his arm around his brother and could not for a moment trust himself to sign back. The days that followed had the shape of a held breath. Eleanor and Henry walked together in the mornings, when the dew was still on the lawn and the river smelled of cold iron. They sat in the orchard in the afternoons, where Henry sketched and Eleanor read, a botanical work she had brought from the Pembertons, which she translated for Henry into signs as she read, sometimes pausing because she did not know a sign and inventing one with him by mutual agreement. That was the thing that undid Adrian most. He had imagined sign as a fixed thing, a system, a code. He had not understood that Henry and his tutor in Vienna had invented signs for Forsythia, for the particular sadness of a Thursday, for the smell of the kitchen at Wycliffe in winter. He had not understood that he, Adrian, did not speak his brother's language. He had only learned the bare grammar of it, enough to give instructions, enough to ask whether Henry was tired or cold or hungry, enough to make himself useful. He had not learned to speak with Henry. He had only learned to manage him. He sat at dinner each evening across from Eleanor Beaumont and watched her cut her partridge and listened to Mr. Halliday explain the migration patterns of the curlew, and he understood, slowly, that he was falling in love with her, not because she was beautiful, though she was in the way that quiet women are beautiful once you have learned to look, but because she had been carrying a thing he had not known how to carry, and she had carried it into a rose garden and given it to his brother as though it had cost her nothing, when in fact he was beginning to understand. It had cost her everything. On the 7th evening he found her in the library after the others had gone up. She was reading by the fire. The book was Boswell. She looked up when he came in and closed it on her finger to mark her place. Mr. Carlyle. May I sit? It is not my library. He sat. He looked at the fire. You sign. Yes. How did you learn? She did not answer immediately. She set the book on the small table beside her. She folded her hands in her lap, those same hands he had first seen moving against each other at the Pembertons' ball. In the small, involuntary gesture he now understood she had been making to herself, the way a person who has lost a language sometimes shapes its words against her palms to remember that she still can. "I had a brother," she said, "Edmund, 4 years younger than I was. He was born hearing. He had a fever when he was 7, the kind that takes hearing and leaves everything else. My father sent him to a place in Yorkshire when he was 11, because he could not bear, my father said, to watch his son become a creature. I will not tell you what kind of place it was. I will tell you that I went to fetch him myself when I was 16, and that I learned to sign on the journey home in a carriage with my brother who had not been spoken to by anyone in 3 years. We built our language between us, the two of us, with our hands, on a journey that took 5 days. He lived another 4 years. He died at 15. I have not signed with anyone since." She looked at the fire. "Your brother is very gifted, Mr. Carlyle. He draws better than my brother ever did. He has a sense of humour. He is also, I think, very lonely. I do not know what arrangements you have made for him, but I would ask you, with as much respect as I can muster, not to undo them when you take him home." Adrian could not, for a long moment, speak. "I have made," he said at last, "the wrong arrangements for him. I have taught him to keep his hands still. I have told myself I was protecting him. I have spent the last 5 years watching him sit on his hands at dinner parties, because I taught him to." She was silent. She did not absolve him. She did not look at him with pity. She looked at him with the steady, undecorated assessment of a woman deciding what kind of man she had been talking to. And then she said, "That is the most honest thing you have said to me, Mr. Carlyle. I am glad you have said it, but I do not think it is the most honest thing you have to say." He went very still. "What do you mean?" She picked up her book and did not open it. Lord Aldridge keeps an old register in the front hall. Every guest who has ever stayed at this house is listed in it. My memory for crests is good. It is good because 6 years ago I wrote a letter to the Duke of Wycliffe asking him to support a small school I wish to establish for deaf children in Northumberland, and I received a reply from his secretary refusing me, sealed with the Wycliffe crest. I looked at that seal for a long time. I have looked at it since, every time I have passed a Wycliffe carriage in the street. She paused. "Your carriage came up the drive unbranded, but your brother's trunk was not. There is a small W on the brass at the corner. I saw it the day you arrived. I have known who you were since Tuesday." The fire shifted in the grate. A log fell. "You have known," Adrian said, "for 5 days." "Yes." "And you said nothing." "I had not yet decided whether I would say anything at all. I told myself I would observe. I told myself I would see what kind of man hid himself in his own friend's house and called himself Mr. Carlyle. I did not believe you were here for an honest reason. I believed you had come to look at me perhaps because Lady Pemberton had put my name on some list. I had not heard your name before Aldridge said it last Tuesday. I believe you now." "What changed?" She looked at him. "I watched you watch your brother from the morning room window the day I went into the rose garden. You sat there for an hour. You did not come down. A man who is amusing himself does not sit at a window for an hour and weep when no one is watching." Adrian had not known he had been weeping. He had not known she could see the window from the rose garden. He had not known anything, it seemed, about anything. "I wrote that letter to your secretary in 1817, she said. "I had buried my brother 3 months earlier. The school was an attempt to make his death mean something. The refusal came back in a fortnight. It was polite. It was final. I do not blame you for it now. I understand that the letter never reached you, that you were 23, that your secretary handled 100 such petitions a year. But at the time, I blamed you very much. I have carried, for 6 years, an idea of the Duke of Wycliffe that I did not enjoy carrying, And then I came down to Kent on the Pemberton's charity and saw a man across a ballroom watching his deaf brother be laughed at, and I did not know what to do with the difference between that man and the one I had pictured. She set the book down. I am not finished with being angry, Mr. Carlyle. I am angry at the woman I was at 22, who had to write a begging letter to a duke and was refused. I am angry at every dinner table at which my brother was discussed as a misfortune. I am angry at you, even now, for hiding your name. You did not need to hide it. You could have come to me as the Duke of Wycliffe and asked me plainly whether I would like to be looked at. I would have said no, of course, and you would have gone away and we would not be sitting here. But you would have given me the dignity of the choice. You took it because you believed you would learn more without it. I would have learned nothing. I know, she said. That is the part I'm trying to forgive you for. He looked at her, at the fire, at his own hands. What do you want? He said. I want the school, she said. I want it built. I want it funded. I want it named for my brother. I want yours to be its first pupil if he wishes, and I want it to be the kind of school where deaf children are not taught to keep their hands still. I want you to acknowledge your brother in public. I want him at your table at Wycliffe with his hands free, signing whatever he likes, in front of whichever guest cannot bear it. I want the guests who cannot bear it to leave. That is the start of what I want. And then, she looked at him for a long time, and then, if you still wish to ask me anything, you may ask me, and I will give you an honest answer. But I will not be asked anything before that. I will not be a reward for behaving correctly. I will be the woman who decides, at the end of the work, whether the man who did it is someone she wishes to know. He nodded. He could not, in that moment, do anything else. The school opened the following spring. It was housed in a converted dower house on the Wycliffe estate, with 12 pupils in its first intake and 3 tutors, 2 of whom were themselves deaf, and a blackboard that Adrian had insisted on purchasing despite Eleanor's quiet, ironical suggestion that perhaps she ought to buy it herself, with her own money, in order to be certain she had earned it. The school was named for Edmund Beaumont. Henry sat in the front row on the first morning and signed, without checking. First, whether his brother was watching, I should like to learn to teach drawing, and one of the deaf tutors signed back. Then you will, and the matter was settled. Lady Eleanor Beaumont did not become the Duchess of Wycliffe that year. She became, that year, the headmistress of the Edmund Beaumont School, and a frequent guest at Wycliffe, and the woman who sat across from Adrian at dinner in autumn and signed to Henry across the table about the partridge, and the woman who, one evening, in the same library where she had told him about her brother, said quietly that perhaps now he might ask her the thing he had not been permitted to ask. He asked. She said yes. They were married in the small chapel on the Wycliffe estate the following May, with Henry standing as his brother's witness and signing the responses in the air beside the altar, because Adrian had asked him to, because Adrian had finally understood whose language his brother spoke and had begun, very late, to learn it properly. The signet ring stayed off his finger for the wedding. He had given it the week before to Henry, who wore it on a chain around his neck and signed when asked that it was the only thing his brother had ever owned that had been worth giving away. If this story stayed with you, the next one will too. They arrive here like a hand offered to someone who has been waiting, quietly, to be spoken to. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one.